Well, happy 4th of July weekend. I hope you had a great weekend and hope you got a chance to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our nation. As we think about the blessing of our nation and this theme of patriotism, I'm thinking about one symbol for our nation that seems to be pretty well known as the Liberty Bell. If you don't know much about the Liberty Bell, you at least know the title and kind of the value that it stands for, namely freedom. That it's this symbol of freedom in our nation. And actually, inscribed on the Liberty Bell is a Bible verse from Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10, that says, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto the inhabitants that dwell therein." To proclaim liberty throughout the whole land. And that's what the idea that the Liberty Bell should be the symbol of how all throughout our nation we are to proclaim liberty. But the irony here is that they use a biblical quote on this bell, which is a good thing. And yet the average American probably defines freedom in a way that's a little bit different than what the biblical verse kind of has in mind. In other words, the biblical understanding of freedom is a little bit different than the average American's understanding of freedom. And I think it's important for us to know the difference. The average American, if you were just to ask, a random person off the street, what does it mean to be free, to live in America that's a free country? What is freedom all about? What does that mean? They probably say something along the lines of, well, freedom is, I'm able to do what I want whenever I want it. And I don't have to worry about somebody telling me I can't do it. That freedom is this idea that we are free from any kind of authority figure or constraint or any level of accountability, that we can chase any desire that we have, and we kind of feel like we're entitled to get it if we work a little hard enough. That's kind of how most of us, maybe not most of us, I'm not accusing you guys, but that's at least how the average American kind of tends to understand freedom. And now look, outside looking in, kind of on a surface level, kind of sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? But the biblical understanding of freedom is something a little bit different. Biblical understanding of freedom is not so much about freedom from all the rules and authority figures in your life, but rather the freedom for love, the freedom for love of God and love of neighbor, the freedom to become who you are meant to be. I like to explain it like this. It's kind of a popular way of explaining it these days. I didn't make this up, but it's kind of like learning an instrument. Maybe you've heard this before. Some of you that may know how to play the instruments, an instrument, maybe the piano, for example, you are free to play a song whenever you like it. If I hear a song on the radio, I really like it, and you want to play it, you might, I could give you permission to play it, but if you don't know how to play an instrument, it's not going to sound very good. In fact, it's probably just going to sound like noise. You're not free to play the song that you want to play. In other words, you need to learn the mechanics of the instrument. You need to learn the art and the language of music. You need to abide by the rules of music. And once you then kind of develop that ability to play, then you are free to play whatever song you want to play. And it's similar in the Christian life. Like, we were designed to be a type of person, namely a disciple, a follower of Christ, to love God and to love neighbor. But because of our sin and because of our brokenness, many of us are not free to be that type of person. Even if we wanted to, even if we wanted to try, give it a shot, because of our brokenness and our sinfulness, we're not free to be the person we were meant to be. And therefore, freedom is something that we should strive for with God's grace, and He absolutely wants that for us. But freedom is about the freedom to love, not simply the freedom to escape from rules and authority. I lay that out for us because in the gospel today, Jesus tells us to take His yoke upon Him. It doesn't sound like freedom, does it? In case you don't know what a yoke is a wooden beam that you put on the shoulders of two oxen so that they are kind of, as we say, yoked together. They're kind of like attached together. And then now they're able to pull a plow for hard labor. It's a farming tool, this yoke that you put upon your oxen. Again, that image does not really sound a whole lot like freedom, does it? But yet, this is what Jesus tells us is going to give us rest. He says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. So how could that be so? One thing that would be often the case is that whenever you have a young oxen that needs to learn the way, you wouldn't just pair him up with any other ox because that might be a disaster. They probably would work against each other and not get very far. So what you would do is very intentionally, you would assign the younger ox to the older ox, more experienced ox, and you would yoke them together. And ideally, the younger ox would learn from the older ox. But usually what happens is that at first, the younger ox, because he has kind of like that puppy energy, just a lot of energy and a lot of youthful strength, tries to go too fast. And in doing so, now the wooden beam starts to cut into his shoulder. The weight is shifted from the beam, and now the burden is heavier. It's more difficult. Eventually, the young ox gets tired of that and starts to get discouraged because he has no stamina because he's inexperienced. And so now he's frustrated. He kind of gets tired. And now he starts to lag behind the older ox. Once again, because they're not in sync, the beam goes into his shoulder and it becomes a heavier load. Now he's frustrated. He's done. He doesn't want to be a part of this anymore. He starts to panic and he starts to walk sideways. He's just desperately trying to escape this yoke that's been put on his shoulders. But the more and more he fights, the more the wooden beam cuts into his shoulder and the burden gets heavier and heavier. Until finally, the young ox looks to his side and sees that there is a larger ox next to him that's keeping his cool. He knows the way. He knows the pace. And he's steadily moving along until finally the young ox gets in step with him. And when he does, to his great surprise and pleasure, once they're in sync, the older ox is able to carry the majority of the weight because now the weight is balanced and most of it falls onto the older ox. Therefore, for the young ox, the load becomes lighter. And this is the image Jesus gives us for discipleship. This is what Jesus wants us to do. We are the younger ox. He is the larger ox. We have a God that wants to carry our crosses with us. That our purpose in life is not simply to avoid suffering at all costs. Rather, it's to walk in sync, in step with Jesus, who's right there at our side. But we tend to be like that young, immature ox. First, we go up ahead, taking everything on our own shoulders, full of pride and vanity. We know that we can do this with our own sense of self-sufficiency. We have the resources, we have the money, we have the talent and the charisma, and we can get this stuff done. So we work hard, and we go so fast we're ahead of Jesus, and we realize that we're not even paying attention to Christ, and we're so far ahead of him that now the weight of the cross is crushing us. And then we get super discouraged because we have no virtue or stamina. And then we give up right away. We're discouraged. We start to doubt our faith. We start to despair. We start to kind of wallow in self-pity. And now we're falling back behind Christ, who's continuing to walk real steady, but we just don't want to do it anymore. We give up. And the weight of the cross continues to crush us because we're lagging behind. Then we freak out. We panic. We try to go sideways. We resist prayer. We resist faith. We resist forgiveness of those that have hurt us. We resist conversion. We just want to indulge in all the sins because at least it makes us feel good for at least a moment. We're going sideways and the cross continues to crush us. Until finally, if by God's grace, we look to our side and we see that Christ has been there the whole time, keeping his cool, guiding us along the path with the right pace, saying, just walk in line with me. Stop fighting the yoke. Embrace it and walk with me. And when we do, finally the yoke becomes easy and his burden becomes light. And even though we have a cross in our life, and even though there still may be some suffering, in a strange but beautiful and mystical way, Christ makes all things new. And somehow, even though we're suffering, we're filled with joy and peace because God's grace is that good. And this is the way of discipleship. This is the lifestyle that the Lord is asking us to live, to take his yoke upon us. Imagine if America, 250 years, we've already made it, but as we continue to move forward, imagine if we as Americans would understand freedom in these terms. Not the freedom of pure autonomy, but the freedom of discipleship. You see, because the freedom of autonomy, the freedom to just do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, with no concern for anyone else in your life, that tends to lead to severe narcissism and selfishness, self-destruction, sadness, addiction, a life of emptiness and despair. In fact, some of you may have tried it before, and you know what I'm talking about. But the other side, a freedom of discipleship, the freedom to do what you ought, to do what you are meant to be, the freedom to love, the capacity to actually notice God in others and to live for them and not for ourselves. That kind of freedom brings so much more life to your soul. That kind of freedom fills you with so much more fulfillment for which you long. Imagine if our nation understood that. If we really understood this biblical understanding of liberty. It's liberty from sin. Jesus, our Savior, has saved us from sin so that we can live in grace. That's what the Lord wants for us. Freedom is not about resisting the yoke. Freedom is about embracing the yoke of Jesus Christ. Amen. Hey guys, thanks again for listening to our podcast. Don't forget to click the links below to learn more about our mission. Thanks.